Welcome to the show. Another episode. This is episode number 3 of the Sharp Football Show. We are going to show you what you need to know to get ready for the NFL and college football this weekend. Super excited. We've had some great records in the first Friday edition of the show. Looking forward to deliver that once again to you this week. With that said, there's no place that I need to start first than to talk a little bit about what we saw last night in the game with Tua, the Miami Dolphins. So let's get started. Going to turn on the streaming cam here for social. Look, the Miami Dolphins lost this game last night, and they lost Tua potentially for a long, long time. First, let's talk about the game real quick, and then we'll talk about Tua. I don't understand what Mike McDaniels was doing opening the game like he was. He threw those 2 interceptions early in the game, and one was targeting Grant DuBose, and one was targeting Robbie Chosen. And DuBose, he joined the Dolphins on August 28th. Robbie Chosen joined the Dolphins on August 29th. That means neither of these guys played in the preseason. What that means is they did not run any routes. They did not have any targets. They did not have any catches in the preseason at all. So week 1, Chosen runs only 7 routes last week, no targets. DuBose runs only 8 routes last week, no targets. This is a complicated timing-based offense. It is not easy to pick up. Now on a short week, we're dialing up plays for DuBose and Chosen in the first quarter and expecting them to be on the same page as Tua. And I did not understand that at all, but let's get to Tua himself. Obviously, the Dolphins, Tua is their most precious commodity. They have neglected the offensive line in favor of Tua and the weapons. And that's why I think this offense is really doomed without Tua. And let's break that down as to why. I don't think this offense can do without Tua what it could do with any other quarterback. Think about this. Over the last 3 years, 50 quarterbacks with 200-plus attempts. Let's check out where Tua stands. He's the number 2 fastest time to throw at 2.36 seconds. But he's still using play action at the number 2 highest rate at 35%. He is averaging 8.3 air yards, which ranks number 11. So think about how this could be possible. Let's use Tom Brady as a comparison. Out of those 50 quarterbacks, Tom Brady was the fastest time to throw. He used play action only 17% of the time, which was the number 4 lowest. Tua uses it twice as often at the number 2 highest. Tom Brady had the fastest time to throw, but averaged only 6.9 air yards. That was the number 5 lowest. Tua is averaging 1.5 more air yards per pass attempt. There's just not another quarterback in the stratosphere who is getting the ball out as quick as Tua, as deep as Tua, and still using all those tricks and disguises like play action at the rate of Tua. And oh, by the way, let's look at the efficiency numbers. Out of those 50 quarterbacks the last 3 years, Tua ranks number 2 in EPA per attempt, number 2 in yards per attempt, and number 4 in success rate. So I just think this offense is going to be sort of lost without Tua helming them. They're going to be in for some problems because forget the fact that you're dropping off from a starter to a backup. This is a lot bigger because of what that starter has been asked to do. It is hard to get rid of the ball as quickly as Tua is getting rid of the ball. It is also hard to do that despite having the second highest rate of play action. Think about what you're doing. You're turning, you're handing, putting the ball in the belly of a quarterback, of your running back, and then you're still throwing the ball down the field. And you're doing that at the number 2 fastest rate that guys like Tom Brady, who aren't using much play action at all, are just getting rid of the ball. Very challenging, very difficult, and still pushing the ball down the field. I'm not sure what Mike McDaniel is going to do in this situation. And Mike McDaniel now joins. He's one of several offensive-minded head coaches that are going to be calling plays for quarterbacks that really aren't up to snuff. Like the backup for Miami, we're going to be talking about Skylar Thompson. We've got Daniel Jones for Brian Daboll. I mean, a lot of these coaches have some bad quarterbacks. It's going to be interesting to see how they're able to compensate for that. So with that said, we're going to get into college here real quick. I'm going to get you some picks at the end. Picks in the middle. We're also going to be taking your questions. So if you're watching now on X, we're going to be delivering picks and takes throughout the show. But you can get your questions in, and we're going to hit some of those questions throughout the show, but mainly focus at the end. So the way you get your questions in is you go over to YouTube. So make sure that you're subscribing to the Sharp Football Show over on YouTube. Sharp Football Analysis is the what you search for on YouTube. You'll find it. Subscribe. hit the like, hit the bell, whatever the stuff you're supposed to do there. You already know, but that's where you're going to be able to get your questions in, and that's how we're going to be able to get them answered on the show. With that said, let's dive into where we are at here. We are coming off of a big week one for betting subscribers. Our recommendations went 29-14, over 10 units of profit for all access members. You don't want to miss out on another great week. Here's 2 deals to get you on board today. Use discount code SHOW40. That'll save you 40% off of season-long betting package, the best and cheapest way to sign up. If you want week 2 only, just use SHOW50, SHOW50. That'll get you 50% off a weekly package. All you need to do, just go to sharp.football, top of the link, figure out what package is right for you, and join. Okay, with that said, let's welcome in our college football expert who is off of a 3-0 week last week, none other than Ryan McCrystal. So Ryan absolutely dominated last week with his 3 picks, and we're going to try to keep it rolling. First game on deck tonight is a college game between Arizona and Kansas State. You like the over. This total opened as low as 56.5. As I'm looking at the odds screen right now, it has been bet as high as 60.5. I think there could be some 59.5 if you shop closely, but for the most part, I'm seeing 60.5. Welcome to the show, Ryan. Why don't you dive into why you like the over tonight?
Yeah, love this matchup between Arizona and Kansas State. Potential Big 12 title game preview, but it's technically a non-conference game because this was scheduled before conference realignment all went down last year. So it's sort of a tune-up for conference play for both of these games. And win or it doesn't really matter. The team that loses still has an excellent chance to get to the Big 12 title game, where I think that we could see a rematch. Like you said, I'm on the over in this game. I took it at 59.5. I was lucky to get it before it jumped over 60. I think I'd still be comfortable playing it up a few more points, maybe even up to 63.5. I think this is going to be a really high scoring affair between 2 very good offenses and 2 questionable defenses on both sides. I'll start with when Kansas State is on offense. They're one of the most explosive rushing teams in the country, and I think they're just going to run all over this Arizona defense, who really struggled 2 weeks ago against New Mexico, giving up 39 points against a bad New Mexico team. So this Kansas State offense should be able to run the ball all over them because that's really their bread and butter over the past few years. And we've already seen it. Last week, Kansas State, they struggled with Tulane. That was a really tight game that came down to the wire. But Kansas State running backs averaged 3.1 yards before contact against Tulane last week. So this offensive line is still doing its job. They've got DJ Giddens, the lead back in the backfield. They've got Dylan Edwards, a transfer from Colorado, who was Deion's big recruit a year ago at this time. And then they've got Avery Johnson taking over at quarterback. He's the reason why Will Howard transferred to Ohio State this offseason, because Avery Johnson was pushing him out at Kansas State. He's a great runner. So they should be able to run all over this Arizona defense. Now, when Arizona's on offense, you've got possibly the best quarterback wide receiver combo in the country in Noah Fafita and Tetsuo McMillan. We're still learning a little bit about this offense because there was a coaching change with Jed Fish going to Washington. Brent Brennan comes in from San Jose State, and he brings Dino Babers with him as his offensive coordinator, which might not sound like a very interesting hire if you followed his career at Syracuse over the past few seasons. In fact, last year they really became a very run-heavy team at Syracuse. But if you go back to his time at Bowling Green, which was the reason he got hired at Syracuse in the first place, his final year there at Bowling Green as a team, they threw for over 5,000 yards. So Syracuse hired him to try to bring this high-powered offense. I think what happened was he just couldn't get the recruits there. Now he's got arguably the best quarterback-wide receiver combo in the country. So he is going to try to throw the ball. And I think he can do that in this game against Kansas State. They had a good secondary last year, but they lost their top cornerback, Will Lee, in the transfer portal to Texas A&M. Lee only allowed 4 catches at 10 or more yards downfield last season, and teams mostly avoided him. Even though most of the secondary returns, it seems like that has really changed the equation for how teams attack this Kansas State defense, because last week, Darian Mensah, Tulane's quarterback, was 8 of 10 when throwing 15 or more yards downfield against them. He completely picked them apart. Huge step up in competition now with Fafita and McMillan having to defend those guys. So I think both of these teams, those the very different offenses, are going to march up and down the field, and I think we'll have a high-scoring game.
All right. Well, there's another way to play this too. If you don't like the full game over, which has been bet up by a lot of points, all the way up to 60.5 right now. First half is still at 30. You can look at the first half total at 30. Okay, let's get it to the next game that you want to talk about here. Alabama is going on the road, and Alabama is facing Wisconsin. This is another pair of undefeated teams. And what do we know about these two teams? Well, we know that last week Wisconsin did not cover the spread against South Dakota. The reason I know that is because I bet on South Dakota catching 20 points when they went into Wisconsin and earned that cover for me. After struggling early last week at home, why do you think, Ryan, that Alabama goes on the road and covers this massive number?
Yeah, I'm laying the points and taking Alabama at 16 in this matchup. And it really has to do mostly with Wisconsin. Luke Fickell was hired to really change the identity at Wisconsin. They kind of got tired of being the best team in the Big Ten West, which now doesn't even exist anymore after the realignment went down, which actually happened after he was hired. But so it worked out well for them, and they kind of got the ball rolling on that early. But they decided they didn't want to be that ground and pound type of team that just beats the Iowas and the Minnesotas of the world. They want to actually compete for Big Ten titles, which they haven't really sniffed anywhere close to Ohio State or Michigan at their peak over the past decade or so. So Fickell brings in Phil Longo as his offensive coordinator, previously at North Carolina, where he worked with Drake May early in his career. And he wants to run a more aggressive air raid system. The problem is that's never been Wisconsin's identity. So they've got to do a complete overhaul of the roster. And with it being a school that's not really a destination, either in the portal or in the regular high school recruiting ranks, it's not going to happen overnight. So you got a team that's really in transition right now. They're taking a step back before they can hopefully take that big step forward and actually compete for Big Ten titles. And so this is just a really tough situation for them. They brought in Tyler Van Dyke from Miami, the quarterback, which is a pretty big get for them in the portal, but I think they might already be having some buyer's remorse because it's looked bad through 2 games. Van Dyke is 2 of 8 when throwing 15 or more yards downfield. And that's against, as you said, South Dakota last week, Western Michigan in week 1. Now he's got to do it against an Alabama defense. That's not going to go well. So this is a really tough matchup for the Wisconsin offense. I think they're really going to struggle to put points on the board. Now, as for Alabama, obviously they're coming off a scare last week against USF. They were clinging to a 21-16 lead late in the fourth quarter before they finally strung together a few big plays very late in that game to make the final score look good. But that was a battle for really 3.5 quarters. I'm not concerned, though, because the reason that game was close, South Florida's quarterback, Byron Brown, is one of the most explosive playmakers in the entire country, excluding sacks last week. 18 carries, 130 yards. Tyler Van Dyke is not going to do that. He's not immobile. He does have 10 carries this year, excluding sacks, but it's 10 carries for 38 yards. So he's not a statue back there, but you're not designing your offense around his running game either. And that seemed to be really what allows the South Florida offense to stay on the field and have a few longer drives and keep that a low-scoring game for most of the game last week. And Wisconsin has no chance of doing that. So I really don't think this game is highly competitive. I think Alabama wins by at least 3 scores, and it has the potential to get out of hand.
So the line has moved a little bit in your favor on this one as well. But let's talk about your final game where the line has actually moved against you, and that is the Notre Dame-Purdue contest. So Notre Dame, this line opened well over 10 points and has been bet all the way down to 9 at some spots. I'm looking at the board right now. Got 9.5s and mostly 9.5s. There's a couple of 9s out there right now. So you're actually fading the big line movement and the money that's coming in on the underdog, and you're looking to lay the points here. What's your rationale behind that?
Yeah, 2 big reasons for this. The first one, I think it's an overreaction to Notre Dame's loss to Northern Illinois last week. I was shocked by that loss. I'm not going to pretend like I saw it coming. But going back to last year, NIU led the nation in opponent-adjusted rushing yards before contact last season. So even though I was shocked by the upset, a team like that can run the ball, they're built for this kind of upset, right? Like they're built to force you into a low-scoring game and to give them a shot at the end of the game where a turnover like Notre Dame had suddenly gives them a chance to pull off the upset. That's exactly what happened. NIU in that game, they ran the ball 45 times for 190 yards. They held the ball almost 10 minutes longer than Notre Dame. So they were built for that type of game, and it just played out exactly the way they would have scripted it if they could. Purdue isn't built for that. Purdue is a pass-heavy team. They've got their offensive coordinator is Graham Harrell, former Mike Leach quarterback. Obviously, they're going to run the air raid. They want to be a little bit more up-tempo. Now, they are probably going to try to slow it down, run the ball more, just because the matchup dictates it. But that's not their identity on offense, and so it's probably not going to work. And then Purdue also, I think their talent is being overestimated a little bit, which tends to happen to these teams that have a bit of a reputation for being sneaky good. But they got crushed in the portal this offseason. They lost two of the best portal recruits in the entire country this offseason. They lost defensive end Nick Scourton to Texas A&M, potential top 10 draft pick next year. They lost their best playmaker on offense, Deion Burks, to Oklahoma. And you lose your best player on both sides of the ball. A team like Purdue cannot recover from that in one offseason. So I think this is a really beaten up Purdue team that's not going to be competitive in a lot of games this year, and a Notre Dame team that probably isn't as bad as they looked last week, and they just kind of ran into an opponent that was perfectly built to stop them.
All right, Ryan. Those are the three bets you're going on record with this week. Thanks for joining the show. Good luck, and we'll see you next Friday. All right, everybody, you can follow Ryan over on X. You saw his handle flashed up earlier if you want to go back and rewind and check that out. Also, of course, he writes up all these games over at Sharp Football Analysis, so you can get some more of his insight and analysis in detail over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Check out those articles. Okay, before we bring in our next guest, I want to talk a little bit about this really interesting, I think probably one of the most intriguing matchups of the weekend in the NFL, and that's when the New Orleans Saints take on the Dallas Cowboys. Both of these teams pulled out massive blowouts in their first game of the week of the season. And as a result, they really didn't have to do very much in the second half. They're kind of coasting. They can take their foot off the gas. So it's really hard to analyze, A, what we're going to get out of these teams, and B, what we're going to get specifically with regard to the pass protection from the Saints. I think that's, as I talk to people in the industry, some of my buddies and whatnot, this is the biggest question that we have is how will the Saints pass protection stand up against the Dallas Cowboys? And I see some of your guys' questions coming in. Please continue to submit your questions over on YouTube. We'll get to some of them. I'll get to one here in a minute. I'll probably scroll back and find one before we bring in our next guest. But as it relates to this pass protection, that's the biggest thing for me. And so, the Saints are running a new offensive scheme for the first time in 2 decades, because it was Sean Payton and then it was his successor, who was the offensive coordinator previously under Sean Payton. And now we've got Clint Kubiak coming in here. And as my colleague Rich Rebar likes to say, we have seen far worse quarterbacks operate this style of offense than Derek Carr. We all have our qualms with Derek Carr. I obviously do as well, about his efficiency inside the 10-yard line and his tendency to bail whenever he is pressured. But that is a true statement by Rich. This is the Shanahan-Kubiak offense, Shanahan tree that Kubiak is running from. And we're going to see some efficiency out of this offense, even though Derek Carr does have his limitations. But I want to talk specifically about the pressure in passes thrown within 3 seconds, because I think Carr, they went up against the Carolina Panthers last week. Carolina is one of the worst defenses in the NFL. We're going to see that on display potentially again this week. Carolina's defense is terrible. They lost one of the best players on their whole roster, defensive tackle, last week. So they're going to have problems. But when Carr threw the ball within 3 seconds last season, which he's going to have to do a lot more against the Cowboys pass rush is a lot better. We're really going to see the test that it poses to the Saints offensive line. Carr averaged just 6.6 air yards per attempt when he threw the ball within 3 seconds last season. In week 1, when he threw the ball within 3 seconds, you know what his air yards went to? They nearly doubled to 11.4. So he's getting rid of the ball quickly, but throwing it twice as far down the field, a lot more aggressiveness. Now, these plays are highly volatile, obviously, but of his 11 first half pass attempts, which were thrown in less than 3 seconds, 5 were passes thrown 15 plus air yards, including 2 that were thrown 35 plus air yards. He had a 22 air yard drop by Taysom Hill in the end zone. That would have been a touchdown if not for being dropped. He had a 35 air yard incompletion to Rashid Shaheed, which was well defended by the defense. And he had a 44 air yard touchdown to Rashid Shaheed, which was caught for a 59 yard touchdown in total. That's what the play had. In total of those 11 dropbacks that averaged less than 3 seconds, Carr was pressured on just 17% of those dropbacks. So I'm really interested to see. They're going to have to speed up the process, but they were very successful when you isolate out when they were speeding up the process just last week against the Carolina Panthers. So I know defensive line and pressure rate are night and day different, but the objective here is to get rid of the ball quickly. And what we're seeing is kind of like Brock Purdy out in San Francisco. They can get rid of the ball quickly, but they do push it down the field. I'm interested to see how the Saints fare early on in this game, trying to push the ball down the field against this Dallas Cowboys aggressive front. Okay, let's get to let's do one quick question. Then we got to bring Pam on here. How do the Ravens match? George asks, how do the Ravens match up with the Raiders? Is Vegas as bad as they seemed last week? Will the extra rest for the Ravens be enough to cover the 9-point spread? So I'm not doing anything with the spread. I don't think the Raiders were as bad as that final score indicated. I just think the coach, Antonio Pierce, was a buffoon multiple times in that fourth quarter, which cost them the ability to keep that game close. Obviously, they were catching points as an underdog. I think there's a very good chance that they cover that spread if they're not numbskulls with some of that fourth and one decision-making late in that game. You also have the unfortunate Gardner Minshew backwards pass that is recovered by the Chargers and sets them up in great field position as well. So you got some turnover luck that went against you, which I don't think carries forward year to year. And keep in mind, was it week 2 or week 1 last year that Gardner Minshew on the Colts went into Baltimore and played a very competitive game against the Baltimore Ravens defense that's a little bit better than this year's Ravens defense is, in my opinion. So I'm fascinated to see that. One of the props, I'm going to sprinkle some around here. We've seen Lamar Jackson pop up on this injury report a few different times. And is he quite 100%? Do we think he's going to quite run as much as he did in that week 1 game on prime time when he's on the road catching points against Patrick Mahomes as opposed to at home as a large favorite? Possibly not. But what would be a lot of fun for fans to see in Baltimore would be big old Derrick Henry busting some nice runs for the Baltimore Ravens, that new acquisition. And so I'm actually on some alt ladders for Derrick Henry from a rushing yards perspective as a large favorite. We saw the Chargers didn't have a lot of success in the beginning of that game in the first half, but they really had some great success late in the game, especially with J.K. Dobbins, former Baltimore Raven, having some success on the ground against the Raiders. So I'm looking at that. Okay. Reset. We're going to bring in our next guest to get to some more best bets for the NFL. Let's welcome in Pam Maldonado. Pam is going to roll through several NFL games that she likes. First on deck, Pam, you got the Pittsburgh Steelers at the Denver Broncos. Historically, this is brutal, taking on Denver in elevation early in the season. Denver is 34-7 at home the first 2 weeks of the season since 1991. They've covered 61% of those games. That's a nice, long track record since 1991. However, Denver is just 1-4 the last 5 seasons at home in those first 2 weeks of the season. And they haven't covered a single game the first 2 weeks of the season since 2017. So this trend has been discussed a lot. And now maybe it's being factored into the point spread a little bit more. Welcome to the show, Pam. Let's hear why you like the Pittsburgh Steelers laying the short number under a field goal on the road and the under.
And the under. I do like Steelers -2.5 at the Broncos and the under 36.5. You have to look at what happened last week. Last week, I felt like there was a lot of betting options. This week, it's a much smaller, precise card. There's not a lot for me to love on the board, so I'm honing in on a game that I love and not just like, and that would be this one. And it's because the Steelers, they're riding high after an upset win, and the Broncos are licking their wounds from a tough loss. Both teams have question marks at quarterback, and that was heavily factored into why I want to take both the side and the total, because this game is going to be more about the defenses. I'm seeing the defenses take a lot more shape, and it's going to be a gritty contest between the both. Backing the Steelers -2.5. TJ Watt, that alone can be the analysis for why I want to take the Steelers. This guy is such a pass rushing machine, ranking 3rd all time in sacks. He's going to be a nightmare for the Broncos' rookie quarterback. Let's remember that, in Bo Nix, and who had a terrible debut kind of expected as a rookie. But against the Seahawks, we're talking about he threw 2 interceptions. He had a measly 3.3 yards per attempt. That was the 9th worst performance for a quarterback in his first start in NFL history. That was a little nugget that we pulled from Rich Rebar's betting preview.
Worksheet.
But
Yep.
looking at the Broncos offensive line, they're also banged up. After week 1, there are already question marks at that position. The left tackle, Garrett Bowles, and center Luke Wattenberg, neither of them are 100%. Both showed up on the injury list after leaving the game early. You're giving me a rookie quarterback behind a banged up offensive line going up against TJ Watt. I mean, that spells trouble alone against the Steelers defense that should be licking its chops. And I do not want to forget about head coach and Mike Tomlin, because he's one of the best coaches in NFL history. As a head coach under Tomlin, a stellar 24-6 record against rookie quarterbacks. Tomlin knows how to exploit the inexperience of a quarterback that is coming into a game behind a susceptible offensive line. I just really love the Steelers getting -2.5 on the road. Now, that being said, I also do love the total under 36.5. I know that it is scary low, but it's also a game where I've put this scenario in my head multiple times. How does this get to 30? The Steelers defense alone should keep the Denver offense in check. Now, on the other side of the ball, you're looking at Pittsburgh's offense, who isn't exactly a juggernaut either. Last week was their first win, 6 field goals without a touchdown since 2008. Justin Fields is getting the start again, and as good, I'm a fan of Justin Fields, but I'm a fan of his running ability, not because of his passing plays. And we saw that come to fruition in week 1, where the Steelers were ranked 28th in passing yards and 29th in pass attempts. They weren't trying to pass the ball. It was a very low-scoring affair last week because they kept with a conservative game plan. And both teams are leaning more into the run offenses. The Steelers led the league with 41 rush attempts out of the gate. So when you have this type of game plan, that's going to eat up the clock. That's going to keep the scoring low. And that's why I like the under on 36.5 with the Steelers -2.5 on the road.
Yeah, no, and my total on this game is very close to the posted total. I would lean personally a tiny bit towards the under, but my model just never gets this low in game totals just because it's just so hard to reach these numbers. But one of the guys was asking a question here, Andrew N. Any truth to the fact that Watt and the Steelers defense were getting signals from the Falcons center, which helped them? Yes. I mean, you looked at the film, I posted it, the end zone angle of the all-22, and clearly they were having a lot of success. Now, they didn't know it the first quarter, but once they figured it out, I'm sure that there were some advantages to be had there. There was another question from Drew Barry. Are there any EDSR matches that stick out to you this weekend? Drew, must be a longtime follower. Appreciate the question because you know about EDSR, early down success rate, a metric I was talking about probably a decade ago, 8-9 years ago. And this game is one of the ones that does stand out a little bit, not because there's an offensive defensive mismatch on both sides of the ball. Both of these offenses were terrible, number 30 and number 31 in early down success rate last week. Now, keep in mind, it's a very small sample size, so you have to work with these things, but that does play a little bit more towards your under, Pam. However, on the defensive side of the ball, the Atlanta Falcons early down success ranked number 31, whereas the Pittsburgh Steelers ranked number 5. So that is the largest overall mismatch on that side of the football of any of these teams this week. The Atlanta Falcons, the Denver Broncos defense on early downs against the Seattle Seahawks, just not good whatsoever. So we'll see how that goes here. Let's move into a couple of props that you like, Pam. Last week you shared that the Jaguars were your team. Now I see that you're on the road traveling, so we don't have the kicks behind you repping the Jacksonville Jaguars. And we know that you bet with your mind and not with your heart. So you bet Trevor Lawrence to throw a pick. He didn't throw a pick, but now you're going back to the well a little bit here on another player prop that involves Trevor Lawrence potentially throwing an interception, but you're bringing Deshaun Watson along with him, which makes this a lot more attractive, in my opinion. Talk to us a little bit about this prop that you like.
And correct. I was initially looking at Deshaun Watson to throw an interception, but that was heavily juiced at -150. And then you look on the board, on the odds board, and then you found this option for either. It was just over 1.5 total interceptions thrown in the game between Trevor Lawrence and Deshaun Watson at +115. And it all starts and ends with Deshaun Watson and the Cleveland Browns, honestly, as a whole. This is a team that just has turnover troubles consistently from last year that's carried over into the new season. They cannot hold on to the ball. Last year, they led the league with a whopping 37 turnovers. And Deshaun Watson, he contributed to that. Even though he played only 6 games last season, he himself threw 4 interceptions. Now, the big question that we had the big assumption entering the season was, well, he has another offseason. He's going to start to gel with his receivers a little bit better. He's going to get more acclimated. He did not get acclimated. In the first game, he threw 2 interceptions against the Cowboys. Old habits are die hard. And so because of that, Watson is struggling. What we have seen from his struggles are continuing on. He has accuracy issues, particularly shaky on those deeper passes. In week 1, he went 3 for 12 on passes of 10 plus yards. His decision making is poor when under pressure, and because of that, he has a tendency to hold on to the ball for too long and bail out of the pocket early. And because he has a lack of rhythm, like, you can look at the grand scheme of things, and Watson does have only 13 games played as a starter in 3 years with the Browns. But at some point, those issues are just there to stay. And I believe this is who he is as a quarterback. Now, looking at the Jags, that is my team. And I do believe in Trevor Lawrence. But he had, just by the simple eye test, it looked like he had a pretty good game in week 1, except he did get sacked a few times against the Dolphins. He could be in for a longer day now going up against Myles Garrett and company. But not only that, Lawrence, my prediction wasn't that far off because Lawrence was ahead of only Panthers quarterback Bryce Young in our off-target rate in week 1. So the opportunities were there for him to be picked off, and now you're going up against a much better defense. So when you have turnover-prone quarterbacks on both sides with an aggressive Browns defense, those are the ingredients to make up a pick fest. So over 1.5 interceptions at plus 115, either player could go get this number by themselves. And at plus 110, I just believe that screams value. You're getting the best of both worlds with that and at plus money. So it's simple pricing. Pressure mistakes in this matchup, there should be plenty.
Is interesting. I'm wondering what the kind of coaching adjustment there is going to be on the Cleveland Browns side of things. You've got David Njoku dealing with an injury. Last week, I want to say that the Cleveland Browns utilized 11 personnel or 10 personnel, which means either 3 or 4 wide receivers out on the field on, I want to say, like 48 of 56 dropbacks. Maybe it was 52 of 56 Deshaun Watson dropbacks. And that was with David Njoku playing a little bit at the beginning of the game. So this team's going to be trotting out there, which is like anti-Kevin Stefanski, what he grew up with. They're going to be trotting out 3 to 4 wide receivers on almost all pass plays. But it was very clear, Pam, that Deshaun Watson's accuracy on anything deep was it 15 plus yards. I think it was 0 for 10 trying to throw the ball 15 plus yards down the field. They got to figure out a different solution here for him. I don't know what that adjustment's going to be from Kevin Stefanski. I'm kind of thinking that Jacoby Ford might get a little bit involved here. So Jacoby Ford receiving yards over 17.5 was something that I was interested in. If you guys are jotting down some notes, think about that. We're going to be getting to some more of your questions momentarily, but we do have one more prop here from Pam, and that is in the Panthers-Chargers game. So this game, the Chargers got the Jim Harbaugh era started on a great note last week, though I'd argue again that Antonio Pierce did his share to lose the game for the Raiders with his decision-making. What prop are you eyeing, Pam, when the Chargers head east to take on the Carolina Panthers, the team that had the most embarrassing performance of week 1?
I like Gus Edwards anytime touchdown at plus 155. When I'm looking at anytime touchdown scores, I like to pick players that aren't the favorites. And Gus Edwards is one of those players. Last season, he was a red zone beast. He had 12 touchdowns on 23 carries inside the 5-yard line. He's already seen red zone action with the Chargers. He had 3 touches in week 1. That was 1 more than J.K. Dobbins, who did, in fact, score. So I think it was just by law of attraction. Here's an opportunity for this week. And the Panthers' run defense, man, it is Swiss cheese. They allowed a league high 25 rushing touchdowns last season and gave up 2 more in week 1. So I'm looking for continuity in metrics, and that's definitely one of them. You are still susceptible against rushing scores. And Edwards has a history with the Chargers defensive coordinator in Greg Roman, who was with from the Baltimore days. So I expect them to, hey, we utilized you in week 1. We're going to utilize you again in some of those short yardage situations. And if the Chargers do build up a lead similar to what the Saints did last week, then they will lean heavily on that run game, giving Edwards even more opportunities to score. So you're getting plus 155 as the non-favorite. To me, that screams value.
There you go. Well, let's hope that these props have some success for the fans. Pam, safe travels to you. Good luck this weekend. Thanks for joining us and being on the show this week. Let's move on now to talk a little bit before we get into your questions, which we will take momentarily. And I do want to say, make sure that you are submitting them over on the YouTube link. Just go onto YouTube as you're watching this show. Maybe you're watching it on X. Go over to YouTube and search up Sharp Football Analysis. You'll be able to find the link to the show. Get your questions in. I'm reading them on the screen. We'll go through them momentarily. But one thing I want to talk about real quick is this Patriots-Seahawks game. You know, Jacoby Brissett, obviously they pull out the upset. Nobody was really expecting that against the Cincinnati Bengals. Cost people a lot in survivor leagues. I'm going to talk a little bit, though, about what I view as a very deceptive performance from this Patriots offensive line and why I think that's going to play into this game on Sunday when the Seattle Seahawks make the trip off of their big win with Mike McDonald starting his tenure there and coming over east to take on the New England Patriots. Jacoby Brissett was pressured on 36% of his dropbacks in week one, which was the 10th highest rate in the NFL. But I want to start talking about the offensive line opening up run lanes for the New England Patriots. Now, we know that the New England Patriots ran the ball a lot and had success when they were running the football. But the offensive line provided 0 yards before contact. 0. Now, for some perspective, the NFL average is 1.29, at least in week one it was. To record 0, that means basically on average, your offensive line isn't opening a single hole on average. Your running back is then running into the line, and he's having to do everything after contact if he's going to gain any yards because there's nothing before contact. And as it turned out, that's exactly what Ramondre Stevenson did. He averaged 4.72 yards after contact. That is, Ramondre Stevenson can be good after contact, but he's not that good. Last year, he averaged 2.8 yards after contact. I think his 2024 stats are actually likely to get worse than 2.8 this upcoming season. And the main reason why is because we use this a lot when we're betting on rushing props. Your ability to have those yards after contact is really predetermined by your ability to gain yards before contact. How much steam can you build up before you're getting contacted plays a role into how many yards you're going to be able to get after you are contacted. And so I don't think if this line is not having much success, and we don't really view the Cincinnati Bengals defensive line as very stout and very imposing. They lost DJ Reader. And so if they can't even gain any yards before contact against, now some of this relates to scheme. Are you running it predictably and things like that? But we think that the Patriots probably are going to be doing that throughout the course of the season. If they're not going to be able to get many yards before contact, I think 2.8 yards after contact is definitely going to decrease. Seattle's run defense last week against Denver allowed 0.35 yards before contact, which was 4th best in the NFL. They allowed 0 yards before contact on 70% of Denver's rushing attempts, which was the best in the NFL. So I think the Patriots rushing attack is going to find things more difficult on the ground. And then let's look at Jacoby Brissett briefly. He had a completion percentage over expectation, CPOE, of 0%. Basically, he completed exactly what he was supposed to against the Cincinnati Bengals. But here's an interesting stat about what he did there. He held onto the ball for 2.93 seconds on average. It was the number 3 longest time to throw. Yet only 17% of his passes went 10 plus yards down the field. That was the number 3 lowest rate of throwing the ball down the field. So you shouldn't have a quarterback who's holding onto the football that long, the 3rd longest time to throw, yet you're throwing down the field at the 3rd lowest rate. And that's exactly what Jacoby Brissett was doing. And that might work against a team like the Cincinnati Bengals. It's not going to work against a defense like Mike McDonald and the Seattle Seahawks, in my opinion. Last week, that's why Jacoby Brissett averaged, 6.4 air yards on average. And he averaged only 5 yards per attempt in terms of completed passes. So the Seahawks averaged an NFL high 45% pressure rate in week one. I think is going to be problematic for this New England Patriots offense to have a lot of success even though they're playing at home against the Seattle Seahawks defense. I'm really looking forward to seeing if, Mike Macdonald can build this Seahawks defense into a little bit of a juggernaut. I don't think it's going to happen so quickly in the season, but they are fortunate enough to go up against one of the worst offenses in the NFL. So we'll see how it goes here. Momentarily, we're going to get into some more bets and props. I've been sprinkling them throughout the show. I did that last week as well. If you guys were taking notes last week, you did really well just listening to this and betting on things that we were sharing. But we've got some more props momentarily that I'm going to be sharing for you guys. But let's go through some of your YouTube questions. Let's see. Nick Dagencourt, you asked, Mina was saying that she thought passing yardage totals were down partly due to defenses playing too high more often. That's part of it. That's part of it. On the Monday show, I was talking about the fact that all of these quarterbacks, there's, I think, 10 quarterbacks that were starters, that were veteran starters that did not play at all in the preseason, and how all of these quarterbacks struggled immensely getting their feet wet, particularly in that first half, but also in the totality of the game. Most of those quarterbacks lost. Most of those veteran quarterbacks who did not play in the preseason lost. And you've got quarterbacks like Brock Purdy and Patrick Mahomes who played in the preseason, who were in the Super Bowl last year and played in the preseason. So they had a very short offseason, played in games in the preseason, got out of there healthy, and dominated in week one. So I do think if we're moving towards a situation in the future where we might only have 2 preseason games. You can say what you want about these inter-squad scrimmages, getting players ready, and we don't need the preseason games if you want. Certainly the data is showing that when you strap it up and go on the field, get lubed up, get used to game situations, you start week one a little bit better from a quarterback perspective. I think that's been pretty clear over the last couple of years of data. And but the too high is obviously a factor as well. We have seen more and more too high being utilized, and we've seen yards per attempt go down by these different quarterbacks. So that's not something novel this season. And defenses have been using it a little bit more though this season. So that's clearly a factor. The Dirk 22, thoughts on the Saints against the Cowboys. Can they keep it under 7? Well, what is this current line right now? It's down to 6. It's down to 6. It's going to hinge, Dirk, on what I said earlier, which relates to this Saints offensive line, and can they hold up in pass protection, and how quickly will Derek Carr get rid of the football? Also, the injury report for the New Orleans Saints defense. You look at Marshawn Lattimore. I believe he's probably going to be out. I haven't seen the injury update. The Saints have been impacted by this hurricane. They've been moving about. And their practices have been off schedule as well. So I don't know if their practice, you guys can tell me, I've been prepping for the show, if the Saints have practiced yet today and what it's looking like for Lattimore. But my projection is Lattimore is not there. So that's going to be a big factor. He's probably going to man up against CeeDee Lamb. I mean, CeeDee Lamb now has the opportunity. I also think CeeDee Lamb being there, running the routes, getting a little bit more. People underestimate how much it takes for guys that have worked together in the past to just get on the same page in the first week or two of the season. It helps when you're in camp. It helps when you're practicing. And so we've seen some quarterbacks who haven't been working with their top wide receivers like Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, or like some of these other guys where those receivers weren't there. It doesn't just like lickety split, like all that chemistry is right back there. It takes a little bit of time. I imagine CeeDee Lamb and Dak are going to have a little bit more success here as the weeks go by, and now you don't have Marshawn Lattimore. That's going to be a problem. But it really comes to, in my opinion, it still comes down to whether or not Derek Carr can execute this Clint Kubiak offense and get the ball down the field like he was doing in week one quickly without getting pressured. Before that pressure's come, can he get rid of that football and not just check downs behind the line of scrimmage, but being a little bit more aggressive here? DZ says, like the video. Thank you, DZ. This is only the second ever show that we're doing this, and already I can tell you I like this production of this week's show, Matt, and all of our guests better than what I did the first week. And I'm all about improving this every single week. So you guys have suggestions or ideas, feel free to share them. We're going to try to keep making the show better and better and better every single week, sharing more winning bets, more winning information, and a good production as well. Let's see. Go ahead. Keep asking some questions. I'll get to a couple more here. Darnold, Geno Smith, Cousins all seem like they could go under their yardage totals. This is from Nick again. So Nick's getting a lot of his questions in here. Yeah, betting under quarterback yardage has been successful week 1. So why change up the strategy? There's a couple guys. Let me jump into one thing here. I'm going to pull this up live as we are talking in one of my favorite weather apps. And I just want to tell you guys, we'll see. There's still time. It's still to be determined. What are we at? We're recording this live Friday, just before 1 p.m. Eastern time. So a lot could change. Weather can change a lot. But an interesting game I think you guys should be aware of is this Carolina Panthers game. The wind speeds have come down a touch, but the Carolina Panthers, we got the remnants of this hurricane is working its way through. The only places I think that it could potentially affect would be Nashville and Charlotte, which would impact this Tennessee game against the Jets and potentially this game, the Carolina Panthers against the Chargers. So it doesn't look like it's crazy, but we're seeing 13 mile per hour sustained with gusts of 28 to 29 miles per hour. Actually, I'm seeing at 1 p.m. we're seeing 30 mile per hour gusts. You know, I don't know that I trust Bryce Young in 30 mile per hour gusts. Now, keep in mind, 30 mile per hour gust does not mean that it's 30 miles per hour throughout the entire time. It just means what is the max wind speed that it could that the wind could reach during a certain period of time. But once again, just factor in the weather a little bit into some of your handicaps, and some of these forecasts on wind definitely could be concerning, but may not come to fruition. So just be ready to pivot if you need to. Thank you, Tom. The best show that we've produced. Enjoyed House last year and Leftco. Hey, Tom, we are going to get Leftco. Leftco's already said he's going to come on to the show. So we're going to be bringing Leftco on. I'm sure House would do it as well. So we're going to bring both those guys. We're going to bring some guests on the show as well. I'm excited to do that. Thank you, Captain Hoop. The show has been phenomenal. Appreciate that as well. Are you concerned with West Coast teams traveling east after covering their spread the week before? Past data has shown a different performance in these situations. This is almost like a Denver trend, where Denver at home in those first couple of weeks had been excellent, 91, 95, 99, 2010, 2015. For the last several years since 2017, like I said before, I think they haven't covered a spread in like 7 or 8 games. It's still an advantage, but it's being baked into the line a little bit. We have seen teams travel a lot better lately than they did years ago. And particularly these teams that are coming from the West Coast to the East Coast, some of these teams have been, they understand the sports science behind things. They understand what to do the day before, what time to go to bed, how to get your peak performance. So it used to be more of a factor than it is now. So it depends on how long of past data that you're looking at, but it's definitely something that you should be looking into. Favorite sack prop of the week from Mitchell Paul. I don't have any sack props. I've released to subscribers. I don't know where my list is here. I've got a ton of props. We're going to talk about a couple of them. We've released a bunch of them, but no sack props yet this week. I tend to, the props that we're going to get into momentarily are some of like the longest props, longest rush, longest completion, longest reception, those types of props. I love that market. I don't really dabble a whole lot into the sack market. I do believe, though, that you should be acquiring information from people that specialize in certain markets. So I'm pretty good and accurate with these longest markets. Me trying to specialize in sack prop markets is not something that I'm probably going to major in this season. Arthur Fonzarelli says, Warren, how about addressing the fact that NFL games last week had the fewest amount of plays I've ever seen, had to be under 120 combined, most teams under 50. Why does NFL have less than college? Well, it's interesting because college abolished that rule where the clock stops after first downs. Clock now keeps running. Games get through a little bit faster. But the NFL, you have teams that aren't running as much tempo. You have the too high shell. What does that mean? You're having a lot of shorter pass attempts. What do shorter pass attempts mean? They're more likely to be completed. What does that mean? It means the clock is more likely to run, but gain fewer yards. So when you're throwing, just think about it, when you're throwing the ball 15 yards down the field, an average completion percentage is a lot less than if you're throwing it 5 yards down the field. If you make that 15-yard gain, boom, that's a huge chunk. That play clock still starts. You got to get down there and get your next play off. If you miss it, then it's an incompletion. Clock stops. Whereas if you're throwing the 5-yard pass, you gain far fewer yards, and the clock is more likely to run with a short gain. And what we also find at times is that the more that you're attempting third downs, the more likely that play is to take longer. The play call is going to come in a little bit slower on average, and the execution of the play is a little bit slower on average, unless you're doing like one of these hurry up quarterback sneak type deals, because that's such a high leverage play. And so the coach wants to make sure he's got the right play call in, and the quarterback wants to make his adjustments. So the more failures that you have on first, second down, the less explosive that you are, the less likely you are from an EDSR perspective to skip third down, the more likely those third down plays are going to eat away at the clock a little bit more. So there's an issue, getting back to the prior question about the too high coverages, etc. Crack, Drew's asking Crack. I talk to Crack basically every day. Crack and I work during the season, so I talk to him every day. He is doing good. He's a little bit under the weather right now, but he's doing good. Are we concerned? Michael asks, what time are we at here? We got time for another couple before I get to some of my prop bets. Are we concerned with coaches? Michael Hunter asks, are we concerned with coaches gaming the injury report this year? Looking at McCaffrey, last night's A-chain situation where he went from a game time decision to 30 touches, Jordan Love status, etc. The A-chain one is different to me than the Christian McCaffrey. Night and day, different stratospheres here. The A-chain one is a short week. Obviously, he's not going to practice ahead of that. I think he went from DNP to limited, and then he played. I saw a report from, I don't know what the guy's name is, just one of the most inaccurate reports that I have seen, where he's like, pregame A-chain doesn't look good. I think he's going to be, he kept using the word restricted. It might have been Omar Kelly. Omar Kelly's like, if I'm wrong on the name, I apologize, but I thought that's who said it. He's really restricted. A-chain doesn't look good. Kept using the word restricted. And then obviously he looked like he had zero limitations. That's very different than the Christian McCaffrey one, where I think all along it does. I mean, I am a betting man, so this is what I would bet, but this is not like gospel from my mouth, that the young running back who doesn't have the experience, who was asked for the game when he found out that he was going to start, potentially did find out on Friday that he was going to start. And they just didn't announce that Christian McCaffrey was not. He was limited all week. They're fully within their right to limit him all week and then not start him. That's totally normal. But if you're telling other guys that they're going to be starting, that's where we run into some of these questions about, I don't know if it's about ethics or rules or what it is, but it does seem a little bit like if they knew that CMC was not going to be in there, they should have shared that information on the injury report or ruled him out prior to 30 minutes before the start of the game. But I don't know what the league is going to do about it. And if I am a coach, I am going to take whatever leverage that I can get to help my team's odds of winning. So I'm going to try to take advantage of the injury report as much as possible. And I do find a lot of the coaches, specifically the younger ones or the less experienced ones, oftentimes say a lot more than I would say. I mean, I might not be all the way Bill Belichick mode in the press conferences, but what's the harm in being close to that? Like, who cares if you're not transparent on injury information if the league is going to allow it? If the league is going to force you to be a little bit more open and honest about injuries, then you do the bare minimum, in my opinion, the bare minimum of what the league is suggesting. Johnny Vegas, let's see. Okay, let's ask this rest advantage one. Then I want to come to Johnny Vegas. Q Jones asked a question, producer Matt, you put it in the chat. Is it too early in the season to consider the rest advantages the Chiefs, Ravens, Eagles, and Packers have going into this weekend? I have found that it is pretty early in the season to really put too much stock into that. I have found that rest advantages matter tremendously more later on in the season, specifically around week 10 and onward, as opposed to here in week 2. So I will note the New York Jets have this really interesting 3 games in 10 days situation, because I don't know Are they the ones that play next Thursday as well? I'm pretty sure. I'm scrolling down my odds board now. Sorry, this doesn't make for excellent podcasting when we put this into a podcast, but I am pretty sure that they're going to just close the odds screen. Lovely. I am pretty sure that they play next Thursday. Next Thursday. So you've got the New York Jets in the first one that we have seen in many years. Just be on the lookout for this, where the Jets played on Monday. The Jets now play on Sunday. And then the Jets are going to play on Thursday. 3 games in 10 days. It's technically 11, but it's basically 3 and 10 in terms of rest. So that's on the horizon for the New York Jets. When you're looking at their game next week, the Jets are hosting the Patriots. The look-ahead number on this game right now is the Jets -7. So just be aware of that heading into the look-ahead. And let's get another one in here. Actually, Tom, I'm not going to answer your question now. I'm going to talk about it momentarily. But Johnny, how many more games can the Browns fans suffer watching Watson out there? I don't know. It's really hard to be a fan of a team like the Browns where they make that decision to bring in a guy who's got a past history like Deshaun Watson does. Some people would consider him a scumbag. And to then expect that you're going to get the team to rally support behind him and do so through struggles. Now, the one thing that for the Browns fans, I can't put myself in your shoes, but it's not like you guys were Super Bowl champs before you brought this guy in. So you didn't really have anywhere to go but up theoretically, but it was a massive PR nightmare. It was a massive ethical, roll of the dice. And now the guy absolutely stinks. It looks like he's completely forgotten how to play football. He struggles under pressure. He struggles with his accuracy. He's dealing with the shoulder. I mean, I really don't know. That's why I'm so interested. Kevin Stefanski was the other guy that I was thinking about. You got all these offensive coordinators and that were former offensive coordinators, now are play callers. Mike McDaniel, who wasn't an OC, but Mike McDaniel, Brian Daboll, and Kevin Stefanski, all with like ridiculously bad quarterback situations right now. Like, we don't know if Tua is ever going to play again. Will he play again later this season? I don't know. You got Daniel Jones and you've got Deshaun Watson. I mean, these are good offensive-minded coaches that are trying to make, chicken salad out of what. And it's really difficult to do that. And I feel bad to an extent for Stefanski to have to change his whole offensive philosophy to try to cater towards Deshaun Watson, because I think ownership wanted Deshaun Watson. And Deshaun wants to play this drop back game like he did in Houston with 11 personnel. But Stefanski's expertise is with heavy personnel and disguise and illusions and pass when it looks like run. And Deshaun's here sitting now. It's just shotgun, 3 to 4 wide receiver sets, firing the ball all over the field. He's terrible at it. And that's what they're doing more and more of. So it's a tough situation. All right, let's get to some prop bets here. Let me get this script here. All right. And what was it? Tom was the guy. Okay. The longest reward. Before we get into this, I want to reiterate one more time. 29-14 last week, over 10 units of profit for our All Access members. Props were great. Props on the show were great. Hopefully props again are great. But if you want more of those props, some of the highest volume stuff, highest unit stuff, you want to be a subscriber. Use the discount code SHOW40. You get 40% off of a season-long betting package. If you just want to get involved in week 2, you can use the code SHOW50. And you save 50% on a week 2 subscription. Go to sharp.football and you can access it. Okay, let's get to a few props. I talked to you guys about it last week. We went 3-0 on the props that I shared last week. At the end, we did better on some of the stuff I'm sprinkling in. So we had a great day if you're watching the show. But I love this longest prop market. So I'm calling this episode, this segment, the longest reward. And this is your reward for sticking around to the end. Let's get to a couple of the props that I like. I'm going to go with Jacoby Brissett, longest completion, under, I want to say it's 31.5. I'm not going to take the time to pull up my screen right now, but Jacoby Brissett under 31.5 longest completion. It might be 32.5, but we might have bet it down. It's probably still 31.5. I already talked about this one. That's why it's so natural to share this one first. The Seahawks got 45% pressure rate last week on Bo Nix. That was the highest rate of any team. I think they're going to get a lot more pressure on Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Brissett already without pressure was holding on to the ball last week for 2.93 seconds, which is the third most. Yet he was averaging just 6.4 air yards per attempt on average, with the third lowest rate of passes being thrown 10 plus yards. That's with tons of time. Do you think Jacoby Brissett is not going to be dropping back if he has to go through quicker because the pressure is coming faster and throw it even deeper down the field? Highly unlikely. It's more likely that there's going to be continued stuff underneath. And we already saw last week on this very show, I took Bo Nix longest completion under 32.5. And that one won against this very same Seattle Seahawks defense. I think his longest was 23 yards, if I'm not mistaken. And then our friend Tom, wherever he is, he asked about Isaiah Pacheco and the Cincinnati Bengals run defense. Oh, yeah, here it is, Tom. The Bengals lost their best run stopper. We saw the Patriots run wild. Are we riding Pacheco over 64.5, also over longest rush? I am on over longest rush. 14.5 yards. Isaiah Pacheco over 14.5 longest rushing attempt up at DraftKings is minus, I think it was minus 120. It was minus 120 the other day. Probably has changed though. So it's not minus 120 right now. I bet it's a little bit higher. But I gave this out to subscribers yesterday. So here's a subscriber bet. 100% agree. The weakness of the Cincinnati Bengals defense is right there in the trenches. The Patriots offensive line averaged 0 yards before contact. 0. Worst in the NFL. And yet, Ramondre, it wasn't the worst in the NFL, but it was one of the worst in the NFL last week. But that's terrible yards before contact. The average was what I said, 1.46 yards before contact, something like that. And we saw Ramondre Stevenson still average 4.72 yards after contact. We know that Ramondre is a little bit bigger body than Isaiah Pacheco, but Pacheco runs extremely violently, and I expect him to have some yards after contact as well, if this is the type of tackling that we're going to get from that front seven of the Cincinnati Bengals. But what I expect is, especially right up the middle there, that we are going to have guard, center guard, a lot of movement and holes being opened by that Kansas City Chiefs offensive line. It's their strength along the line, is that those three position groups right up the middle. We're going to have a lot of opportunity for success for Isaiah Pacheco, and I expect him to break at least one rushing attempt for 15 plus yards. All right, that'll do it. We hit the hour mark, guys. Thank you for subscribing. Every Tuesday and Friday, the Sharp Football Show, noon Eastern time. Spend 45 minutes to an hour with us. I'll go through your questions every single week. We're happy to have you guys here. This is the first full week of the show. Never done it before. Please make sure if you love this show, give us a thumbs up on YouTube. Go subscribe on YouTube. We'll try to keep doing these shows every week. And like I said, we'll try to bring on some more guests as well. So really enjoy doing this. Really enjoy answering your questions, the feedback, the interaction, sharing some bets with you guys. Good luck on all your betting action. Remember, go over to sharp.football. If you're interested, look at some of the packages. Great first week. Hoping to repeat that here in week 2. Good luck on everything you do this week. We'll catch you on Tuesday at noon Eastern. We're going to go through a recap show detailing everything that we learned from week 2 of the NFL season, some of the things that we think you need to know, and some of the action that you might be able to get involved in early because of some of this data that we're crunching Sunday night and into Monday, Tuesday at noon. See you guys then.